what I think I'm going to do with questions is I will take 3. If you want to tell me who you are, is somebody taking around a microphone, or are people just going to be... You're taking that, great. Okay, that's great. I should pass the microphone around to people who need to speak. So let's take 3. Tell us who you are, and tell us if you are directing your question again in relation to one particular person on the panel or a selection of people on the panel. Okay, so I will take you first, then you, and there must be a third. Come on. The guy in the middle, the bridge.
Dave Bridge.
Okay, let's have the first question.
Harvey Garfield, addressed to the whole panel. Given the exponential growth in anti-Semitism that we've seen certainly since October the 7th, and all that we've heard from the panel today, does the Jewish community have a realistic future here? And if not, what would be the tipping point? Thank you.
Okay, then the next question we have over here.
Yeah, hi, my name is Richard Cafton. I am doing a post-retirement PhD in UK anti-Semitism and the future of the Jewish community as a result of Islamist antisemitism. My question is, once they come for me, they will then come for everybody else. With that in mind, why does it appear that the general Muslim leadership in this country is so reticent in coming forward as far as anti-Semitic Islamism is concerned?
Okay, and finally, Dave in the middle. Just over here.
So Martin, I remember well those days when nobody took it seriously, and it was very frustrating for us. I wonder for all of you, is it your sense that now those same people in authority still don't understand Islamist anti-Semitism? Or do you think they do understand it, but they just don't know what to do about it?
Okay, so we have 3 very good questions. Sorry, Daniel.
Want me to come back, or?
You want to come up here if you'd like.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Do you want to answer one of those?
Yeah, can do. Yeah, you can wait till
No, let me pass this to you.
Okay. I think I already have my mic. I think I wanted to come to that last one, which is that I think that there is probably actually even less willingness to talk about this now than there was back in the 90s. We've actually slid backwards. There is incredible resistance to talking about these issues. There's incredible resistance even to listening to somebody else talking about these issues. I do not think that the government understands. There is a lot of work going on to try and communicate these things, which you all know all about. And I think that we now face much greater obstacles to talking about these things than we ever have before. Things have got particularly bad with the government seems to have retreated from the idea of adopting a legal definition of Islamophobia, for example. But when you look at the way that the previous candidate for a legal definition, the APPG definition of Islamophobia, it appears to have been formulated partly in order to stop people talking about Islamism. The government has retreated from the idea of adopting that, and indeed from having a specific definition of Islamophobia generally, which is a good thing. But we've seen that there was an article in The Guardian yesterday about MPs wanting a definition of Islamophobia, etc. There is a huge battle going on right now just to be able to talk about these things, and that's why I think we are now in a state of greater crisis than we've ever been in before.
Yeah, I'll cover some of those. On Dave's question, yeah, I think it's a reticence to identify it as sort of uniquely sort of Islamist version. They'll usually want to have a balanced view of it and say, you know, anti-Semitism comes from various sources, including the extreme right and Islamists. And I think because of fears of being accused of Islamophobia, you're not going to get any current government dividing it in that way. And yeah, just to, you know, when I give an overview of the differences between Islam and Islamism, I think there's still a queasiness about even using that term because of how close it is to just accusing all Muslims. And you know, I think, and I don't want to downplay Islamophobia. I think that's a real thing, and actually there are aspects of it that are similar to anti-Semitism, including this sort of essentializing of Muslims and a conspiratorial view of sort of the Muslim presence in the West. And I've written about it quite a lot and do consider it a problem. But it's a different sort of problem. And what Islamists have been able to do, in fact, what fascists in general are very good at doing, is making themselves seem like the little guy all the time. When the truth is, you know, Islam, huge, powerful, cultural, political, social force over history in our countries is incredibly powerful, and incredibly powerful in the countries in which it is the majority religion. It's not a little guy, not here or anywhere else. Islamists have managed to sell this idea, though, that it is. And that combination of kind of self-pity, victimhood, the sort of myth of a past greatness, and the sort of existential threat, conspiracy theory, it's a very dangerous combination. It's used by violent and bad political actors all the time, and it's been used very effectively here and been bought into by a lot of people here, and has prevented taking this seriously. But this is something that's not news, really. On the future for Jews in the UK, I mean, you know, for me, and I don't want to undermine, again, here people's personal experiences. I'm not a member of a persecuted minority, so it might be easy for me to dismiss that kind of thing. But I do try to avoid sort of hyperbole when talking about these things. I think, you know, generally speaking, relatively speaking, Jews are safe here, and they should feel safe here. Groups like the CST do great work, and I'd be interested to hear what Dave actually thinks about that position. But I do think this is still a very safe country for Jews, while acknowledging that they are always disproportionately targeted for hate crimes. Anywhere where these crimes are tracked, compared to the size of the population, Jews are always massively disproportionately targeted. I remember the stat that I again heard from Dave was some of the most anti-Semitism this country's ever seen was in the days after October 7th, first, second, third days, not the beginning of the Israeli response, but just after the mass killing of Jews was the spike. And I think, you know, all these ideas that, you know, what Israel's doing is making things worse. I mean, it's not helping, but actually the truth is a much worse story behind anti-Semitism here. It hasn't got all that much to do with Israel. Yeah, so I'll give a chance to the panelists.
Well, I'm not familiar with the British situation, but in general I can say the danger of Islamism has a root, and one of the roots was mentioned by Ahmad Khomeini, the son of the religious leader in Iran, in the year 1991, after the fall of the Soviet Union. He said, after the fall of Marxism, Islam replaced it. And this is in a way true, because Islamism is the only remaining force that presents a consistent ideological alternative to capitalism. It's endowed with enormous financial resources, and it has global reach. There is no other movement like that worldwide to see. And so this kind of activism which happened since October 7 is typical for mobilizing for a new alternative to capitalism, but it's the old alternative which the Nazis already presented. The Nazis called themselves anti-imperialistic, anti-capitalistic. So we have to acknowledge that these terms are not holy and that you can use them in every kind of sense. So I think Islamism is really the biggest threat today in the world, and we are not seeing the finish of Islamism, but maybe, I hope not, the beginning.
Thanks, Matthias. Charlotte.
Hi, I just wanted to reflect on a couple of the questions. One was on Muslim leadership and what they're saying on this. I think that's very hard to... I think there's a slight problem in the question itself in that there is no collective one umbrella organisation that represents all Muslim communities. They're very diverse, have very different, some of them very different beliefs and practices, to the point that some Muslims would disagree that they were even Muslims. And the diversity within Muslim community itself, I would say Muslim communities. So whilst you would have some leaders engaging in anti-Semitism themselves, you have others that are standing up against anti-Semitism. One of the spokespeople for the Ahmadi Muslim community in the UK has spoken a lot against anti-Semitism. And Fayez Mughal, who was supposed to be with us today but unfortunately isn't well, is very forefront in speaking out against anti-Semitism. Obviously we have Faiza with us here today, so I think that we don't have a collective Muslim leadership because we don't have a collective Muslim peoples, and you will find different spokespeople or leaders or whatever you want to call them. They may not even call themselves leaders, will have different opinions on it because they are diverse people. When it comes to does the government understand, avoiding sounding like I'm just repeating what I was just saying, but again, that's quite broad and diverse, the government. Yes, my personal experience has been there is more understanding than you would think from the outside looking in, and it has been, I've had multiple occasions where I have been told, quote unquote, to box clever when dealing with Islamism, to don't talk about that right now, we're in the run up to the local election, it's Purda. No, we're not going to work with that community, but probably going to lose us the votes this time. So I have actually been directly asked not to work with a discriminated Muslim minority group who are being bullied by Islamists in a local area in a run-up to a local election. So I think there's more understanding than it is seen. And yeah, of course there is ignorance. But there's also, I think the most worrying thing I found in my PhD study of this discrimination of a very small Muslim group is the extent by which Islamist ideas have normalised to the wider public. So whether that is internalising blasphemy regulation, sort of thinking and fear around discussing Islam as a religion or criticising parts of it in debate, you know, that this fear of engaging in this discussion, this internalisation of Islamist ideas, that extends to, I think, an internalisation of anti-Semitism both through the Islamist feed, but also far left and far right. There is such a high level of anti-Semitism that I think that's a really dark reason also why it's overlooked. Partly ignorance, large part politics and fear, and a small part actually the extent by which people are harbouring anti-Semitic sentiment themselves.
I'll just briefly say that so I was the Home Affairs editor of The Observer, but then I was the political editor of The New Statesman, and there was very little understanding at the time. I think the understanding has increased within government, but there are still serious electoral calculations to be made, and in those terms, Jews really don't count. The numbers game is very much in favour of not talking about these kinds of issues. But I would also say that it was always my feeling, and from reporting about radical Islam in the 90s that actually young Muslims were hugely affected by this ideology, hugely damaged by this ideology. They are the ones who are dying in suicide bombings. They are the ones who are being excluded from mainstream society as a result of this ideology. I would have loved to have thought that we'd be in a position all these years later where this issue is being debated more within Muslim communities. That has not really happened. I don't know, I can't tell how many Muslims there are in the room, but I would like to see more discussion of this at mosques, within or among Muslims in Parliament, and unfortunately that just hasn't really transpired.
Thank you, Mark. I think I might ask you as well, what should the government be doing, do you think? If you thought about that, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you thought about it.
Well, this is really a hard question to answer. I don't know. I better to say I don't know, but I think UK has already established its law, and the government is not enforcing that. So maybe before just trying to solve the issue and come up with some policy recommendations and come up with new things, maybe first thing is that they should already implement the previous laws and policies, and they are not enforcing that. This is maybe what comes to my mind. And I also wanted to address, there was a question about the Muslim community leadership. And this is correct that the Muslim community is so diverse and there is no single leader. And this is one of the reasons that if we want to name one Muslim leader for the Muslim community, there is someone who really wants to has the leadership and gain that power. And he is the leader of Islamic Republic in Iran, Ali Khamenei. I often say that Ali Khamenei has lost the power in Iran. He doesn't have popularity in Iran, but I think he is winning the UK. We are seeing that in every weekly march in London for Palestinian march. Right now, they are holding his photos, and it's really terrible. I have witnessed that. I think it was during the 12-day war between Israel and Islamic Republic in Iran. I was in the rally, the counter rally, on the side of my Israeli friends, and it was a very small rally. But what I have seen on the other side was that everybody was. I was Iranian, and my Iranian friends were on the Israeli side. But what we have witnessed was that there were many non-Iranians on the pro-Palestinian march holding the photos of Ali Khamenei and the placards who was saying that hands off Iran. This is the situation.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I'll come for questions in a second. I mean, just picking up on that, one of the things that I found the most extraordinary about the past 2 years is that for much of the past 2 years, we've seen some of the most spectacularly open and unapologetic anti-Semitism delivered by imams in sermons from mosques. And I'm talking about things ranging from theological examinations of how the Battle of Khaybar, where Muhammad killed and enslaved various members of a rival Jewish tribe, brings a lesson for the present, or the hadith that Matthias spoke of earlier, the rocks and the stones that call on Jews to be killed, and other things in a similar vein. These things have been made the subject of very insightful, very explicit sermons, but yet not a single charge has been laid, which I find quite remarkable. I cannot imagine that happening in any other context. I think we've got a whole range of questions. I think we've probably got time for one more round. So let's have the hands up again. Okay, 1, 2, 3, and then I'll come to you two guys if we can later. Thank you.
Right, thank you. My name is Louise Elman. I'm a former MP. At the last general election, several MPs were elected on an Islamist ticket. And there are a significant number of current Labour MPs who are fearful that they will go next and be replaced by Islamists in their constituencies. Now, what significance does the panel think that has with addressing the issues that we're now discussing?
Thank you.
I'm Eve Kay, I'm a TV producer, and thank you for your introductions. And I wanted to say that my experience of trying to hold the BBC to account over the last 2 years has been identical to yours, in that they have completely been unable to hear Jewish and Jewish allies in the media trying to point out the bias and the lack of partiality and the complete distortion and misinformation that's been put out every day, 3 times a day, which leads me to the conclusion, hearing you guys talk about the lack of policy interest. Are we not banging our head against the wall? Are we talking to the wrong people? And I suppose a question back to Charlotte, because Charlotte raised the spectre of reform. The 2 events now that I've been to that have been pro-Israel and sort of Jewish solidarity, Richard Tice has shown up and taken time to speak to me. Should we not, given that they might form, we don't know if they're going to form the next government, but they're becoming very important in British politics, should we be changing our focus? Should we be changing our tactics?
Thank you. Hi. My name's Nick Cohen. I'm a journalist. I'd like to ask the panel this, or put something to the panel. Most people I know who are left-wing, or Muslim, or even not particularly left-wing, they would say, well, look, the reason why there's so much anti-Semitism is because of the number of civilians being killed in Gaza, but also because of the behaviour of the Israeli government and the extreme right in this country. We've had the Israeli government intervening in our internal affairs in Britain and raising Tommy Robinson and bigging him up. We've had, as the last speaker says, a markers against anti-Semitism, where Richard Tice appears, and lots of people, including left-wing Jewish people, thinking, what the hell is this guy doing here? Someone from the extreme radical right. And I just wondered if anyone on the panel thinks it would be better if people who are against anti-Semitism in Jewish organisations really spoke out against Netanyahu government. I know the Board of Deputies did when they invited Tommy Robinson, but said, look, you people are absolutely promoting people in Britain who hate Muslims. In the case of Robinson, people associated with him who have the strong the stench of violence about them. And would it help if Jewish organisations spoke out better, or do they think the situation's so bad it wouldn't make any difference?
Okay.
Well, I think I want to just comment on the last point. Based on my understanding and observations of the far left or Islamists or radical Muslims, I don't think the solution would be like changing the behavior of, for example, the Israeli government, or just, coming up with the solutions. These far leftists and Islamists really feed from appeasement. And if you change your own beliefs, your own behavior, for example, if Israeli government want to just change its own behavior based on what they ask you to do, these Islamists and the far leftists, they just become more and more powerful. They come for the next step. They push. And this is, I think, their behavior, and it's important to note.
I hope I'm understanding the question correctly about tactics, and I think terrible bedfellows, as in sort of what's happening with the relationship with Tommy Robinson. And I have seen this happen with sections of the Hindu community as well, with Tommy Robinson and the pro-Modi section, when I was doing a lot of work around anti-Hindu sentiment in the UK. I think it's really dangerous and completely undoes one's position of moral authority to associate and work with, and it seems easy, it's attractive, he has lots of followers, he has a presentation style which seems to be successful for him and engagement, and quite often swimming with that current means being able to have a voice and being given some sort of platform and following. But it's so important, especially now more than ever, to hold on to what there is very little left of the central ground. In fact, rebuild the central ground. We need people speaking out for liberalism, liberal values, tolerance, equality, the acceptance of LGBT and diversity, and holding fast to the liberal values I'm sure most of us share here, and calling out the likes of Tommy Robinson for his past, the kind of parades he went through London, shouting at Muslim groups. And you've got to remember as well, he at one point was supporting the Sikh community, then was completely against the Sikh community. He could turn on a sixpence on the Jewish community as well. And when we see other people that he aligns himself with, far-right individuals who will bring up the fact that they believe the Jewish community to be behind wokery. You hear elements of the far right saying that Jews created the liberal wokeism we see today, and they are the reason for the migration crisis in the UK. So they're very dangerous allies. They're just quick, and they have sexy lines, and they know how to get a popular following. But we shouldn't be changing our tactics to move in any direction with these people, but instead work together to build a stronger central ground.
My question was about
What was that?
My question was about Richard Tice.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Can I just address, I think, your question and Nick's? I think there were moves that made a difference. I think the traditional holding of government to account on this issue did have results in the 90s and 2000s. The work that John Ware did at the BBC, that we did at the Observer and the New Statesman, and actually that Nick Cohen did as well, did move towards a greater understanding of what the Muslim Council of Britain really stood for. And the fact that they were a one-stop shop for government, that ended. I mean, we were often accused of Islamophobia as a result, but I think that was a correct decision on the part of government, and they've never been invited back in. I mean, despite huge pressure to do so. I think that was correct, and I think that was a progressive move. So sometimes it does work. Sometimes the traditional pressures do work. To address Nick's point about Israel and Netanyahu and condemnation, I mean, my view is that none of the conditions that you're talking about, Nick, existed when we were writing about these Islamist groups in the 1990s and the 2000s, and yet that anti-Semitism was still strong. I do not think a condition should be put on Jews to take responsibility for ending the anti-Semitism that is directed against them. However, I do think that if it is your position that you are opposed to the Netanyahu government, then of course it must be right that we build solidarity with groups within Israel who feel the same. And that building civil society in Israel and building networks of solidarity amongst people who feel the same way as you should definitely be an imperative. That's my view.
Thank you. Just a very quick thought about. A distinction is often made between cultural nationalists and people sometimes called white supremacists, better described as neo-Nazis. One of the things I've noticed is that cultural nationalism is something which it characterises all of our politics, and it comes in a very strong form, which can sometimes be objectionable, but it, in its weak form, it underpins essentially all political parties and all political movements, because cultural nationalism, in its weak form, is essentially just the cultural glue that binds a nation together. But at the radical end, the dividing line between the crankiest cultural nationalist views and the cranky neo-Nazi views, the boundary is often fairly sort of thin. And the thing that I think, it was very clear, I think, that the American Trump movement, that part of the National Conservatives were going to go anti-Semitic. They have done so. That was a predictable thing that was going to happen. And I think you have to be very careful when you work at that end of the political spectrum. As Charlotte said of Tommy Robinson and the Sikh community, these are people who are opportunists, they're grifters, they're cranks, and they do turn on the sixpence.
Sorry, Tyson.
Well, again, I can't comment on the British situation, but there was one question concerning the relationship between Israeli behavior and anti-Semitism, and I would like to answer to that question. Well, it's very clear that if you criticize the Israeli government based on facts, that's never anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism starts with rumor, with lie, and the fight against anti-Semitism is essentially a fight for the truth. So, on the other hand, we have a special item with anti-Semitism because the law of cause and effect does not apply to anti-Semitism. There was no cause for the Holocaust. There was no cause for the blood libel. But it took many, many lives. And so it's the same with the attack from Hamas. There was no cause because Israel wanted to appease Hamas by giving money to the Gaza Strip and to improve the situation in the Gaza Strip. But nevertheless, Hamas attacked. So also in this case, there is no cause and effect. And I think this is very important to mention.
I think I would say that one of the greatest causes of the flourishing of anti-Semitism in the immediate aftermath of the 7th of October was that it became visibly possible to kill Jews.
Mm.
It's the killing of Jews that excites more anti-Semitism because it shows it can be done. Mm-hmm. Sorry, me.
Yeah, I mean, I touched on it before with the CST stats on the most anti-Semitism they had seen was immediately after October 7th. That was quite revealing to me. I mean, I think it would be hard to deny that, right or wrong morally, the way Israel is conducting its operations after October 7th is radicalizing people. I mean, it reminds me of the Iraq War period when lots of young British Muslims became convinced that there was an effort to destroy Islam, and that was based on their reading of the Iraq War and how it was playing out. While I didn't think, I wish they hadn't thought that, I could completely understand why they came to that conclusion based on how they were viewing that conflict, essentially many Muslims dying at the hands of British and their allies' weapons. So while I don't like the fact that people are becoming more anti-Semitic because of what Israel's doing, it's hard for me to deny that they are, just from my own personal experience, also from my sort of research on sort of following these communities online. It is impacting people. The kind of moral outrage is very often a kind of key radicalizer for people, and this is causing a level of moral outrage and even more lack of trust in the state. Again, something that happened right after 9/11 and after the war in Iraq, that sort of bottoming out of the trust in the authorities. We're seeing that again, and we're seeing we're still dealing with the bottom, the sort of fall of trust in authority after Iraq War. We're still dealing with that, by the way, and we're going to be dealing with what Israel is doing to our population. At least Israel, our population's reaction to Israel's actions. We're going to be dealing with that for a while. It's turning a lot of people into cranks. But I can see, I'm personally, think that some of the tactics being used by Israel are, very fairly being described as war crimes and should be investigated as such. And unfortunately, we cannot take out the fact that Israel is treated differently because it's a Jewish power, and that's hard to deny. But equally, I think we have to accept, whether we like it or not, or it's fair or not, what Israel is doing is increasing anti-Semitism in this country. But Jews were targeted before that. Tree of Life Synagogue in the United States, one of the last real massacres of Jews in a synagogue, obviously happened before that. Many examples I can give you where Jews were killed outside of a sort of period of Israeli high military activity. So we can't pretend it's the only reason, but it's hard to also deny that it's having a very negative impact on our society and on the fabric of it. And let me link to that. Louis Elman asked about the independent MPs. I'd like to think that they're a product of the moment as well. Like before, we just had Galloway would get elected every time some of this stuff happened, right? Iraq War or Cast-led, Galloway would get a seat for a bit. I'm hoping that these independent MPs are also just taking advantage of the moment, and they won't manage to kind of continue once this dies down, if and when it dies down. They are part of a sort of sectarian, identitarian politics that we used to be manipulated by non-Muslims and is now being manipulated by Muslim politicians. But how they govern matters. If they're only going to focus on Israel-Palestine, I think eventually, people aren't going to vote for them. That's my hope on that. But I could well be wrong. And just on these sort of extreme right, sort of pro-Israel or anti-Semites. Charlotte was talking about these podcasts that Five Pillars, the Islamists, sort of the neo-Islamists run today. And they have guests like Nick Griffin, also Jada Franson, who are really sort of traditional, let's say, white nationalists. These are proper ethnic nationalists. Their diagnosis for what's wrong with the white race is primarily based on their view of Jewish power, and they view the migration crisis and the demographic change in this country as the result of Jewish power, and that Muslim presence here, or the quote-unquote Muslim threat here, is simply a symptom of the Jewish hidden hand, and that is why they have found friends with the Islamists and are being platformed. That's one of the right-wing traditions in this country, this sort of, as I said, the ethnic, nationalist, hardcore anti-Semite. Robinson, he does represent a different strand of right-wing thought, of xenophobic, ultranationalist thought, and crankish conspiratorial thought. But his diagnosis is very much that Islam is itself the threat, that we are facing a conspiracy theory of different type in which our societies are being Islamized by a sort of combination of Muslims and a sort of liberal elite. He does talk about the Great Replacement theory, but he doesn't include the Jewish component of that. As I say, he represents a very crankish, right-wing, xenophobic, authoritarian politics. It's very dangerous. I do think he is genuinely not an anti-Semite, and I'm not sure he would change on a sixpence on that one. He's been consistent on that. And I'm not going to be on the platform defending him, but just understanding
the movement as a whole.
Yeah, of course, the movement as a whole, you can't trust. And they'll say stuff that sounds kind of all right on this issue specifically. But yeah, be very careful. They're dangerous people, absolutely. And he may well be happy to ally himself with anti-Semites, though he has been quite careful on that. But yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Daniel.
Hi. Can you hear me? Yeah. Great. Yeah, I wanted to respond to a couple of things. First one is, thanks for that question about Richard Tice being at the counter anti-Semitism rally. For me, the question is not why was Richard Tice there. It's why were the leaders of other parties not there. That is the big problem and what we ought to be thinking about. And I think the answer to why, for example, there were not high-level representatives of the Labour Party there, I'm afraid the answer was given by Louise Ellman in a question which was in itself, an answer, I think. This is unfortunate. This is part of how the political landscape of the country is changing at the moment. There was a question earlier about Jews having a long-term future in this country. If there's anything I can do to make that happen, I will. But I cannot see how the Jewish community could possibly be feeling safe at the moment. The very thing that Jewish community and Jewish communal institutions have been warning about for years happened exactly a month ago in Manchester. The political response to that has been minimal. People are more afraid of being accused of Islamophobia than they are of further deaths. And that's unfortunately the reality of what we're facing in the UK today. I also want to say one further thing. I don't think that the actions of the State of Israel are increasing anti-Semitism. A lot of the time people will present things as criticism of Benjamin Netanyahu. But really what they're criticizing is actions which the State of Israel would have had to take regardless of who was Prime Minister. I think really there is no way that Israel could have prosecuted its war of self-defense that would have pleased the anti-Semites, apart from rolling over and saying, please go ahead and kill the rest of us. I'll leave it at that, thanks.
Okay, I will leave now.
Okay. Matthias has to go and get a plane, so...
Yeah.
Go back on
yeah, can I just...
Just one thing just to follow up on what Daniel said. You said what the Israelis are doing is not going to please anti-Semitism. That's true. My point is that what Israel is doing now is gaining the attention of many more people who weren't previously interested in this, or anti-Semites, of a younger generation of people who are getting the information about this in a very dangerous way, in a very unclear way, but nonetheless, we're kind of losing a new generation of people to this who had no interest in any of this before. And I don't think the way the war has been prosecuted is helping make the case for these kids who unfortunately are exposed to levels of anti-Semitism now that they were never accessible to them before. I think it's giving them a new audience, unfortunately, and it's empowering it, whether we like that or not, is my fear anyway.
Okay, we now have 15 minutes, including my final peroration, which will be very short. I think we probably have time for one question. There is somebody who's had their hand up for a long time. Who was the person who had his hand up for a long time? Do you think we might just take that one question, and then I know we will finish on time? And apologies to the other people who didn't get a chance.
Thank you very much. I think you were really right on the civilizational question, but I am concerned around the idea of when you've got a proper study with rigorous categories, and it's been so good listening distinctions between Wahhabism and Salafism, and then you correctly, Charlotte, made the point about people like Nick Griffin on the far right and people on the far left. But I don't know if it was a sleight of hand, but when you talked about the far right as well and then reform, it seems to me that categories are really important, because we also know that millions of the British public were called racist at the recent Labour Party conference. And I wonder, and it's also to the point you made, people often talk about Tommy Robinson, but I don't think it really explains the phenomenon that happened at a recent demo where, without playing numbers, many people turned up that perhaps aren't really interested in him, but are very concerned about Britain, Charlotte's point about liberalism, about decency, equality and fairness. And surely that should be the appeal to the public, because perhaps when someone like Mohsin Ali is now the deputy chair of the Green Party and we see Aspire and other things happening, I don't think it's temporary. It looks like it's consolidating. And perhaps there are colleagues and friends that come from the old left and centre-right, things like that. So I just think that's really important, and the appeal to the British public, and I wonder what the panellists think about that.
Look, it's a very difficult terrain to navigate. I think we should, of course, be careful when Islamist sympathetic or highly conservative Muslims gain political power, in the same way I would be concerned if an extreme right-wing Christian, who has no chance, by the way, of getting elected in anything in this country, unlike extreme right-wing Muslims might have more of a chance, I would be equally concerned. But at the same time, there is, you mentioned reform and categories. From when I listen to what reforms say about the Islam question, what I hear is a version of the Islamization conspiracy theory. I think there is still an essentializing of Muslims, a pushing of a sort of bogus idea of Sharia law being really implemented here. Now, again, there are Sharia courts in this country that I'm not happy about. I've written extensively recently for the Commission on Counter-Extremism on the attempts to make blasphemy illegal in this country and to threaten people, and I take that very seriously, and I think they have a lot of influence. But it's a difficult terrain to navigate because I see the threat and I understand what the threat is, but I also think a lot of the people who might be sympathetic to actually have views that I would find to be illiberal, essentialist, bigoted towards Muslims. So it's a difficult one, and I can understand why people are voting reform. And I can understand why people are concerned with Islam, but I would urge people not to fall for the kind of easier black and white explanations for this. But recognize that maybe I could be wrong about that. But yes, as I said, observing these movements every day, I do recognize it's a very hard one to get right all the time. But yeah, I guess we'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Martin, do you believe?
Yeah, I want to come in on the street politics point, really. I think we need to be careful always about over-interpreting street politics. For those of us who ended up, I was working as a journalist at the time, but for those of us who ended up opposing the Iraq War, it was all too easy to over-interpret the numbers that were on the streets of the UK opposing that war. Because, as we know, Tony Blair was then re-elected as Prime Minister, so it wasn't that the whole of the country was opposed to that war. There were lots of people on the streets, but it's too easy to over-interpret that, and I think there's a tendency to do that with some of what's going on at the moment. The real test will be in the ballot box. I also think that we perhaps one thing we haven't addressed is what is going on in conversations that we are perhaps not hearing. So we have called this event Islamist Antisemitism. We have not called it Muslim anti-Semitism. I am seriously worried about, as I've indicated, about the intergenerational transfer of some of these prejudices. And I think, to a certain extent, we are having a conversation among ourselves here, and that we perhaps do need to grasp the nettle and ask what conversations are happening within the Muslim community as a whole, not just the Islamist element of that community. And I think there are parallels within the wider community with conversations that are going on about Muslims and conversations that are going on about immigration.
I think just landing there on the immigration point, I actually think that the large crowds that we've seen gathering, quite often it seems to be focused on immigration and stopping the boats. And I think, and yes, I shouldn't have said far right and reform, right wing, you're right. But what we're seeing here and what we're seeing these people gathering around I think is a complete misreading of the threat, and it's an easy thing to get people riled up about. But the work that needs to be done to tackle Islamism and extremism in this country is far harder and far deeper. And actually, migration, as Faisal has said, is not actually where we're seeing the majority of Islamists coming from. We're seeing them as second, third generation who feel like they have a foot in two camps. They don't really belong here, but they don't belong anywhere else either, having that identity crisis. And then what the Muslim Brotherhood has set out to do, this civilizational jihad, as it coins it itself, to replace Western norms with Islamist norms. This is their strategy that they clearly delineate, and that is done in the country through the people that live here, that are citizens here already or have already found their home here. So I find paying any attention to this flocking to the streets around migration and the constant hubbub on the news around migration to be hugely disappointing and distracting from the real issue which would make this country safer, which is dealing with the ideas that are already here and the people that harbour these ideas, working on integration, working on promoting liberalism and ideas within schools, understanding in schools about the different forms of discrimination that exist, the bullying between Hindus, some Muslims and sections of Muslim communities bullying Hindus, for example, in schools, really niche issues that are taking place that are a result of a extremism that is already here and has been here for a long time and is not arriving on boats. So I find the whole, the reason why I mentioned reform is it's a distraction, and the popularity it's gaining is not based on where the true issue lies. Therefore, by dealing with this issue, we'll actually solve the problem. So I'm very worried about that being the direction through which we see the answer to Islamist antisemitism. If we see that as the answer, we will not solve the problem.
Thank you. And very finally...
I just wanted to make some points here. I think it's both the British society is being so radicalized, and also there are more and more radicals are coming to the UK. I think this is the mix of both, not one of them. And the sad thing here is that based on the UK policy, the path to reaching to the British citizenship from getting asylum or coming as illegals is much more easier than like gaining the working visa and going through just a few years and then gaining the British citizenship, which is really alarming here. And another thing I wanted to mention is that sometimes we just see Muslim community and all of the Muslims as very attached to only one value, which is based on religion, Islam. It is not always like that. There are Muslims who agree with, for example, Tommy Robinson. There are Muslims, many Iranians are now a supporter of Bibi Netanyahu. So I think the Muslim community should also be seen as a normal community, just as we see Christians who accept some of the facts that are being mentioned by atheists. And Muslims are also behaving like that at some point. Not most of them, but some of them. So I think this is a very missing point here, that we sometimes feel that by kind of canceling or removing a few individuals who are talking against the whole Muslim community or are anti-Islam, we can solve the issue. Muslims are not simply looking into the issues like that. They are just, many of them are just normal people, and they agree with some of the points that, for example, even anti-Islam people are making and disagree with others. So I think this is an important point to note, that they are not super special and different from other communities at some point. Thank you.
I have one over here. So we have reached on time the end of this absolutely incredible seminar. I just want to do a few things before I finally wind up and let you go. First thing to say is that this is a seminar in 2 parts. The second part takes place in the House of Lords in committee room number 2 and starts sharp at 5:45. You should be arriving there a little bit earlier than 5:45 if you have booked the House of Lords and you have email confirmation of your ticket. To get to the House of Lords from here, I think most people know, but it's 2 stops from Temple to Westminster, or you could walk if you fancied. I was told, and Danny, I cannot remember, what's the name of the gate that people must go in at? It's not Black Rod, it's the other one. Cromwell, that's right, it's the Cromwell Road entrance, not the Black Rod entrance. So that is where you go through this evening. So I think really in conclusion, the only thing I really wanted to say was I wanted to pick up on the very end of Martin Bright's presentation, where he looked at the article that he'd written in the late 1990s, where he said, it's really very important that we give these Islamists a fair hearing. Now, Martin chuckles about that, but actually I think that's spot on. One of the things that policymakers do not do is listen to what these groups and these individuals and their thinkers have to say for themselves. Instead, there's a great tendency to view what Islamists think, say and do through the prism of what matters most to us. So it isn't unusual for people to say, well, of course, this is a product of foreign policy, this is a product of the failure of our state to integrate people, this is a product of the impact of racism on marginalised communities. Now, of course, those factors will be present and they will have an impact. But what people are extremely bad at doing, and people do not like to do, is to put themselves in the minds of other people, to see the world as it looks through their eyes. Because only by doing that do you understand how people understand the world and how they're likely to plan their actions based upon their understanding of how the world works. So if we've achieved anything today, and I think we've achieved a great deal, we've actually, to some degree, admittedly through proxy and maybe through characterisation, given some sort of hearing to Islamist ideology. It's very important to understand it, it's very important to take it on its own terms. If you don't do that, you will not be a successful predictor of future actions. So the very final thing that I want to do is the characteristic, the required thing that one does at the end of the seminar, and thank all of the participants. They've been absolutely magnificent. Thank you to Daniel, who we'll be hearing again from later, to Matthias, who's had to go back to Germany, to Charlotte, to Martin, to Alex, and to Pfizer. Thank you so much. This has been an incredible session. Thank you.